Welcome to the Happy Spot podcast on talkradio.nyc, sponsored by Jack Thomas. I'm your special guest host, Gaetano Lardiri. I'm a cannabis and psychedelics researcher and advocate for many years and professionally as a consultant in these two spaces for the last 11 years. In this special podcast series, we'll dive deep into all things medical cannabis and psychedelics, exploring how these compounds can transform lives, reduce stigma, and advance groundbreaking research. Drawing from my experience and connections with advocates, scientists, therapists, industry leaders, and so on, I'll introduce you to some of the most fascinating and innovative minds in cannabis, psychedelic science, medicine, research, insurance, and beyond. Get ready for an eye-opening journey into these dynamic industries and beyond. Just a quick disclaimer, the podcast doesn't substitute for legal or medical advice, and we don't condone the use of illegal substances. Welcome to our fourth podcast in this special series, which will feature two special guests, Lauren Cohen Dayton, Esquire, and Joe McKay, retired NYPD firefighter. This talk today is about cluster headaches. That is a very important topic I have been interested in advocating for now for several years since I met Joe and Lauren. Without further ado, before I go into asking you questions in our discussion, please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about who you are and what your involvement is with cluster busters. Ladies first, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Guy, and thank you to the Happy Spot for having us on this program today. I'm excited to be here. So I am a lawyer, a councilwoman, a mom, an advocate, and about 12 years ago became a cluster headache sufferer. And ever since then, I have attempted to work in headaches and neurological pain disorders advocacy. And so I'm thrilled to have the platform today to discuss it. I'll pass it to Joe.
Joe,
Yeah.
yes.
Hi, I'm Joe McKay. I'm a retired FDNY firefighter from Engine Company 201 in Brooklyn. I'm also an advocate. I've advocated for the 9/11 bill, for burn pits bill, and for headache disorders with the Alliance for Headache Disorders. I'm also a board member of Cluster Busters and a cluster headache survivor.
Thank you and welcome, Joe and Lauren. Joe, quick question. Why did you decide to become a firefighter?
Yeah, I could say it's a calling. It's definitely a calling, but I have family. I have uncles that were on the fire department, the FDNY. So since I was a little kid, it was always a dream of mine to become a firefighter. And as I got older, yeah, that calling came to me in my early 20s to take the test, and I was lucky enough to do well and get hired. So, yeah,
excellent. New York is lucky. And Joe, tell us a little bit about your experience on 9/11.
Yeah. So I had offered to work that tour, but I was off. My company had a fundraiser on a golf course in Staten Island that day. So my buddy Shotzi ended up working that tour instead. We were all on the golf course when we found out what was going on, obviously, and we made our way. After the second plane hit, we knew it was no accident. We made our way into downtown Manhattan. Yeah, unfortunately, Shotzi, my buddy, didn't make it. 343 firefighters were killed that day. Four of them were from my company, and altogether I knew 26. So it was a rough time for all of us, for all New Yorkers, and for the country as well. Yeah, it was funerals and memorials, and for 6 months, and I don't need to go over it again, but I'm sure if you're old enough, you remember what it was like being in New York at that time. It wasn't fun, but we did what we had to do as New Yorkers to get the city back up and running.
Absolutely, absolute heroes for sure. And Joe, what happened to you and your health in the months after 9/11?
Yeah, so 6 months, after working on the pile, and like I said, going to funerals and memorials, there were sometimes as many as 10 a day when we couldn't make them all. I was 6 months out thinking I can't get any worse. I was in a good place. And I woke up at 1 a.m. feeling as if someone had just stabbed me in the eye with a burning hot ice pick. I thought I was, I thought I was having an aneurysm, that I was going to die. I ended up in the emergency room, and after about 2 hours, the pain went away, and it happened again the next night. They didn't give me any answers in the emergency room. Nothing. They couldn't tell me what was happening. 6 weeks after that, I was lucky enough to get a proper diagnosis of cluster headache, otherwise known as the suicide headache. So yeah, after dealing with the loss of 26 people and that I knew on 9/11 and everything else, and now I had this pain condition that I had to deal with for the rest of my life, on which there was no treatment and limited treatments and no cure.
Yeah. And so, Joe, elaborate a little bit more. Tell us what cluster headache is actually.
So cluster headache is it's really a misnomer. It's not a headache, although the pain is in your head. So it's, technically called a headache, but it's like migraine. It's a primary headache disorder, meaning that nothing else causes the headache. It is arguably the worst pain known to mankind. Pain is subjective, but there's been a study that asked people that have cluster headache to rate their pain with other things that happen in their life, like unmedicated childbirth and gunshot victims, burn victims, kidney stones, shingles, you name it, and cluster headache came out on top. So it's very difficult to treat, and unfortunately, over 70% of us have suicidal ideation, and that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to teach people how to live with this disease.
Exactly.
Guy, I'm sorry, I'm going to just add, Joe and I, in the past couple of years, there's been some amazing research and things that I've read. It's really a neurological pain disorder of your nerves that are through your head, through your eye socket, usually on one side of the face, and that's really its defining characteristic. And it comes on in a very cyclical manner, usually at the same time, middle of the night. But someone described this to me in our group, and I think it's a very apropos thing. It's like waking up to a broken bone in the middle of a deep sleep, and that level of pain is how you wake up. And I feel that's very accurate. And I have had childbirth, and I would do that again before I suffer my worst attacks and clusters.
Wow.
Yes. So the name cluster, it comes because you get them in clusters. You get them for weeks or months at a time, and then if you're lucky to be episodic, they go away. 8 attacks a day is not uncommon for a cluster headache sufferer in peak of cycle. So 8 times a day, anywhere from a half hour to 3 hours, you have that burning, stabbing ice pick feeling in your eye. Yeah.
Interesting. Lauren, let me ask you, how long did it take you to get proper diagnosis of cluster headache, and why do you think that was?
So I had never heard of this in my entire life. And it's interesting, my internal medicine doctor never heard of this. Nobody in my local hospital ever heard of this. So when I had my first attack, it was the middle of the night, I thought I was having a seizure. And so I went into the ER saying, I can't see out of this side of my head, and the level of pain is so intense. Nobody knew what it was. And, they put me on a morphine drip, which did not break it. And, I was there for about 48 hours. They sent me home, and the cluster headache itself went away, but I don't think anything in the hospital led to that. And I didn't know it was going to come again. I had never known this. I had a newborn at the time, so I was already up in the middle of the night. My sleep cycle was already a mess, with a newborn. And, it just kept happening repeatedly, a couple times a week. And I kept saying, well, I must have a tumor. I got MRIs. I got, wound up going to various neurologists who didn't even diagnose me. It actually took me 4.5 years before I heard the word cluster headache. And somebody said, oh, one-sided eye, you must have clusters. And I said, I don't know what that is. And then it took me about another 2 years to find the right neurologist who understood the condition. And during that time, I was on so much medication, so many side effects of the medication, weight gain, brain fog. I had passed out. I had low blood pressure. I had heart issues. I, couldn't drive. Nothing, by the way, was taking away the pain. I was on daily medicines that would not fix this. So it wasn't until I actually met Joe and a group called Cluster Busters that I really started understanding the condition and finding the right doctors and the right diagnosis. We are lucky. One of the things we're working on as advocacy groups and Cluster Busters is to get information to hospitals and doctors. And I can't say it enough. I've now taught my own internal doctor all about this condition. And I think that patient advocacy is really sometimes the best way for you to get the right care.
Absolutely. Advocacy, talk to your legislators. I agree 100%. And Joe, let me ask you, were prescribed medical treatments helpful for your cluster headaches?
No. Limited success with a steroid taper early on when I started getting the attacks. It would take it would take a couple of weeks for it to kick in. But like Lauren had said about the morphine, there's no painkiller that'll touch the pain of cluster headache attack. It just, no painkillers work. Fentanyl, nothing. Some of the other meds, that I had gotten were, making me like a zombie. Some of the, the side effects were horrible. The only thing that ever really helped for a short time, like I said, was a steroid taper, a high dose steroid taper, but nothing else came close.
No other intervention, no other medication.
Well, there is one. A certain percentage of cluster headache patients do respond to triptans, which is a migraine abortive drug, but you can only use it twice a day. And cluster headache patients can get 8 attacks a day. So any more than 2 doses a day, you can cause problems with your heart. The side effects are aneurysm and cardiac embolism. It's not something you want to be using all that much. But yeah, there was no, up until a short time ago, there were no drugs brought specifically to market for cluster headache.
Right. Okay, so when we come back, we'll go to break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask Joe when you learned that psychedelics may be effective for treatment for cluster headache. So let's go to a quick break, and we'll be back in a minute.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to talkradio.nyc. I'm your host, Gaetano Lardiri. So Joe, let me ask you, tell us about when you learned that psychedelics may be an effective treatment for cluster headache.
So when I first got wind of it, I was still an active duty firefighter. And I kind of read it, and it just went like in and out my head real quick. I was like, what is this about? It was an internet search. And I was like, yeah, no, that's not happening. It wasn't until many years later, after I had retired, and I had a bad cycle, that I actually sought out, that search on the internet, and found that there was a study done, actually at Harvard, with psychedelics as a treatment for cluster headache, and they had a high success rate in that small study. So that was the first introduction, for me, that psychedelics could be a treatment for cluster headache.
And describe for us and tell us that first time you tried psychedelics for cluster headaches.
So I had reached out to someone that knew a guy that used to go to Grateful Dead concerts, and because I knew nothing about psychedelics, I wasn't into it as a teen or a young adult. But yeah, I ended up with a small dose, and I should say that I ended up with some chocolates. It came in a chocolate form, and I didn't know much about it. It was very light. The psychedelic effect was minimal. It was just maybe some bright colors. Other than that, but I had read that it could be used as a prophylactic. It could stop cluster headaches from coming on. You could stop the cycle altogether. So for a while, I was, once every couple of months, I was just having a mushroom, and I missed my cycle for 2 years, and I can't say for sure if that was the case. My suspicion is that those short doses did keep the cluster headaches away, but it wasn't until 2017 when I had a really, really hard time with it, and I wasn't able to find the Grateful Dead guy, couldn't find any, and I was kind of between a rock and a hard places. That's when I reached out to Cluster Busters, and eventually someone called me back, and I was able to get it. And yeah, I had a much more psychedelic experience that time. But the next day, the attacks were gone. Like, they stopped the attacks in the tracks. Yeah, it also shortly after that, it also helped me realize during the psychedelic experience that I had PTSD from 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And that it hit me like a ton of bricks, while I was under the influence of psilocybin. I could see how I had changed. And at the time, I was hooked on prescription painkillers. The doctors were more than happy to give me tramadol and Oxycontin. I did have back issues, but I realized during that psilocybin experience that I was taking the painkillers not to numb the physical pain, but to numb the emotional pain. So I had that experience, that one experience. I could say it benefited in the way that it stops the pain of cluster headache. It woke me up to the fact that I had PTSD and helped me get to where I am today. And it also helped me get off of the opiates. So I got a hat trick when it comes to psilocybin for me. I benefited in 3 ways.
And fantastic. And actually, how do the psychedelics actually help you?
So, as far as the headaches go,
yeah,
that's the $1 million question.
It's a mystery of all time.
Yeah, it's more or less like the serotonin 2A receptor in the brain is suspect with cluster headache, and a lot of other conditions as well. So the research that's being done, and there isn't a whole lot, unfortunately, because of the funding, but the research is pointing towards 3 different parts of the nervous system, and that serotonin 2A receptor fits nice with psilocybin and LSD and psychedelics in general. And when Albert Hoffman, who first synthesized LSD, he was working for Sandoz, the drug company. He was actually looking for a treatment for headache. And if you look at the chemical structure of psychedelic compared to the chemical structure of some of the headache medicines that are on the market today, they're very similar. Of course, I'm just a fireman. This is coming from some of the doctors that I've gotten to know over the years. So.
Understood. And Lauren, let me ask you, what does someone in your position with little or no medical options for pain relief do to find solutions?
It was really hard. Like Joe said, we get put on a ton of medicine that are not effective for our cluster condition. And so I was really desperate. I don't remember how I stumbled upon Cluster Busters, But at some point, I actually met Joe McKay and another group of people that suffered from this. And Joe was the first person I'd ever met who had the same condition. And Joe has been a mentor, an advocate, and just the greatest person of my support system. I can't say thank you enough. I tell him he saves my life all the time. And he did, because I was suicidal. And I am super happy in my life and I adore my family. And the last thing I wanted was to actually commit suicide. And I had told my husband so many times, like, this pain is going to take me down. So I actually found Joe at just the right time, really. And he introduced me to Cluster Busters. And Cluster Busters on its website had a lot of informative videos on oxygen therapy, which I did find very effective to break a cycle that you're already in. But to stave the cycles off completely, I hadn't tried anything yet. And then I actually in person met Bob Wold, who was the founder of Cluster Busters. And I went up and I introduced myself at a very small gathering, and I said, I haven't tried psilocybin. And he looked me right in the face and he said, you need to. Like, you need to. But, psilocybin not being legal was very difficult for me to make that decision. I hold an elected official position. I am an attorney. This is still class 1 scheduled drug in every state. And so to make that leap of faith was really hard. And to find psilocybin that I believed was safe and not laced with anything else or not causing any other side effects also was so important to me. So very lucky I had a friend give me my first dose in a pill form that I took. And I took a very low dose because I was very nervous. And I remember calling and saying, nothing's happening. And and they said, well, take more. And then I took them all. And then I was like, oh. But I will tell you that I didn't have cluster headaches for like 9 months after that. It was
Wow.
groundbreaking to my life, just unbelievable. And last year, was it the year before? It was the last December. I didn't do my fall dose. I usually take it twice a year. And I wound up all of December in such pain and suffering in a cluster headache that I couldn't break with anything. It took almost 30 days to break out of that cycle. And I said, I will never miss a dose. And, it doesn't have to be a lot, but whatever it does, Joe was talking about the serotonin two-way receptors. I try to research and read the NIH papers on this, and they do say it reforms new neurotransmitters. So maybe it's forming new connections. However it does, I'm also not in the science world. So my layperson idea is that it's helping my nerves and reforming connections to go around things that are damaged. Whatever it is, it's life-changing.
It's working. That's fantastic. And Joe, tell us about the advocacy work that you do.
Yeah, so in the United States right now, there are only 11 states there that don't have some kind of psychedelic legislation that's been introduced. Right now, I want to say about a dozen states. I've met with legislators, telling my story and telling the people about cluster headache and how it's become, the leading treatment amongst the cluster headache community. I also tell my story, the hat trick story that I talked about before. It like Lauren had said before, I had thoughts of suicide as well. After those experiences, I don't have those thoughts anymore. So I mean, it's literally saved thousands of lives that I could, knowing what I know from with Cluster Busters and speaking to Bob Wold and others that have and met at conferences, thousands of lives, I could say that. And it's not even just here in the States, it's all over the world that people know about it.
Yeah. So, yes, go ahead, Joe.
No, I was going to say that you want to talk about the bills or?
Well, yeah. So I wanted to ask Lauren. Lauren, why do you think the public is so resistant to learning and trying and researching alternative solutions for pain?
So, it's interesting. Even I was myself resistant because I think the concept of the drugs from the 1970s has tainted this industry. So many of our incredible medicines are nature created. Penicillin is your perfect example, mold on an orange. And I think that the industry halted looking into these natural solutions when the war on drugs in the 70s and 80s really escalated, the harms. But so much of what Joe and I do is citizen science. And the people who came before me in this cluster world, they tried different doses and small doses and regulated doses and timed themselves so that they know almost better than the scientists what's going to work. And then we go and we get to tell the scientists at labs and universities, hey, please try this because we know it works. But we're so few advocates. And so the idea that something like a ketamine, a psychedelic, a LSD could be from nature and healing, it's just not in the public. And we need to change that perception.
Right. And Lauren, how has Cluster Busters helped specifically your cluster attacks?
They're educational, it's advocacy. Bob Wold and his incredible team, I know Joe's on the board, they are constantly providing education and information. I didn't know how to use oxygen. I got this huge tank. Everyone said, go get high dose oxygen. I didn't know what to do with it, but they literally had a video and this is how you do it. And that kind of, like I said, citizen science where they have learned techniques and they're sharing them with other patients and other pain sufferers is just life-changing again, because I would have no clue. My doctors don't know a lot of this, but this community that suffers with me has created its own solutions. So Cluster Busters, if anybody is out there listening with cluster headaches or other headache disorders, please go to their website.
Yeah. What's the website again, Lauren?
I'll let Joe.
Clusterbusters.org.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the study that Lauren was talking about, the citizen science, the protocol that was just tested at Yale over the past couple of years, actually, was the protocol that Cluster Busters designed through citizen science, which is a pulse regime, which is low dose psilocybin once every 5 days. The study was done at Yale, and it proved the efficacy of that dose of that pulse regime. So.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so we'll go to a break, and then when we come back, we'll focus on New York legislation. So let's go to break, and we'll be right back.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marsanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to talkradio.nyc. I'm your host, Gaetano Lardiri. So, Joe, let me ask you, focusing on New York, is there legislation that would expand legal access to psychedelics?
Yeah, so there are 4 bills right now that have been introduced. Linda Rosenthal has a decrim bill that she put out a couple of years ago. It's still active. Senator Natalia Fernandez and Assemblymember Pat Burke have a bill as well, actually 2 bills as well. And then we have the chair of the health committee in New York, the Assembly Health Committee, Amy Paulin, has a bill as well, which Julia Salazar is a senator that just signed the companion bill in the Senate. So there's 4 bills right now floating around in Albany, and we hope they all get done.
Well, can you take a bit of a deeper dive into the Poland bill? That's personal psilocybin permits. Can you talk? That's that's fascinating. We talked a little bit about it before, but can you go into a little bit more detail about that, Joe?
Yeah, so it's the bill is 2142 is the number, and it basically is a adult use psilocybin a permit program. So to obtain a permit to use psilocybin, adults would have to undergo a health screening, and then also complete a safety and education course that would be given by the state. The bill would also authorize the purchase and cultivation, possession of personal use of psilocybin for health and wellness purposes, and it establishes opportunities for psychedelic assisted therapy as well. The bill would also allow for licensed cultivators. So the cultivators would be able, they grow the mushrooms, and they would be tested and what have you, and you would know what was, what you get in there. And unlike the cannabis, where you would go to a dispensary and get it, the bill would actually provide for a courier service from the grower, from the service center. I'm sorry, from the cultivator directly to your home. So there's no, there's no dispensary you'd be able to walk in with. So it's regulated. You have a safety aspect, the education aspect as well. And I think that bill would probably provide the most access to the most amount of people.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting concept, an interesting bill. So that's the one that you think has the best the legs.
Yeah, it's getting a lot of buzz. Like I said, there's 39 other states that have legislation, in the works, and this bill has been actually the model itself was proposed decades ago, and it was just picked up, by us up in New York, as far as giving it a try, as putting legislation out there. But there are other states that are looking at this model, and there are people that are policy experts that feel that this is probably the best way to go to avoid some of the pitfalls with the FDA and what have you. Yeah, we're really excited about this bill. Allison Hoots is an attorney, one of the attorneys that helped put it together. She did the lion's share of the work, but there was a team in New York that got this bill put together. So we're very, very excited about all of them, but especially Senator Poland's bill.
That's excellent. Now, is there homegrown in any of these bills at all?
Yes. Yeah, the Poland bill would provide, if you're a licensed, if you have that permit or license, the wording is still up in the air. But if you have the ability, from the state, the okay from the state, you'd be able to grow your own. So someone like myself who has cluster headache, I would be able to grow my own mushrooms at home, and they would never leave the house. Yes, yeah. I'm sorry, guys.
Now, is that regulated in any way, or is that how does that work actually? That's interesting.
Yeah, so if you're going to grow on your own, if you have a permit and you're going to grow on your own, there's no regulation for that. But licensed cultivators in the state. So these are basically mushroom farmers. These the New York Agricultural Board, the Ag Board in New York State actually is behind the bill. So mushroom farmers that are growing, regular mushrooms now for restaurants or what have you in New York, they would actually take on this task, and they would be, testing and potency testing and what have you that they would have to do, and then you would get the, psilocybin mushrooms from these cultivators. Okay.
Oh, excellent. I see. So, Lauren, you recently testified with Joe before a New Jersey legislator. Yet that proposed bill has stalled. What do you think needs to be done to convince states to move on the issue of psilocybin?
So in New Jersey, they're considering a psilocybin bill that is a therapy based bill. So it would be a combination of psilocybin with required therapy in facilities that would be created here in the state. I'm in New Jersey. And there was a lot of pushback about who could be allowed to attend the facility, who can make the decision on who those patients would be. Would it be just doctors? Can it be therapists? Can it be people in this industry in psychedelics? And then there was additional pushback from from what I understand, the Department of Health. They weren't sure that they can get enough support behind the bill. We are, Joe and I say we're still very hopeful that this bill will move forward here in New Jersey. There was a lot of good discussions with our Assembly and our Senate on the state level. We had a lot of bipartisan support. Everyone saw this as a health initiative, which is always welcomed. And Joe and I both testified before the health committees, and then we testified before the budget financing committee.
And it got out of that, I believe.
Yes. Right. And we had very positive reception. So right now, I think, we have advocacy groups that are working to keep this bill momentum moving, and I hope so. And if anyone wants to join that coalition, the nice thing here in New Jersey on our bill is that we had a lot of wonderful mushroom farmers join our advocacy. And so I do think in terms of farming and trade and regulation, that was all here and ready to get involved. So, we are the Garden State. I'd love to see this.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's the bill number is S2283 if anyone's interested. And if you're in New Jersey, call your legislators, let them know you want that bill to move forward. But go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, it's the legislators that we've been meeting with, we really haven't gotten much resistance. The psilocybin received breakthrough status from the FDA back in 2017. When we go in, we meet with the legislators, we start talking to them. A lot of them are already aware of what's going on with psilocybin, especially in the veterans community and first responders, where veterans and first responders are being sent out of the country for psilocybin therapy. And it's charitable organizations that are picking up the cost of that. And it's really not fair that, that we send our soldiers to war and they come back with PTSD, and we're dealing with this crisis, suicide crisis with veterans with a number of, almost 22 a day. And yet we can't take care of them here at home, and we got to rely on charitable organizations to send them to Jamaica or Mexico to get this therapy. Some of the legislators that we met have military experience, and it's the worst kept secret in the military is that psilocybin could help with reintegration into civilian life with veterans and just general mental health as well. So it's the stigma is breaking, and it's going to take more stories from people like Lauren and myself, and I've met politicians that use psilocybin. I've met judges. I've met sports stars. It's like I said, it's the worst kept secret out there right now, and it's just a matter of each state being brave enough to and smart enough to bring it forward to the masses. So that's what we're hoping to do.
I agree, and I hope New York and New Jersey lead. And if we can't take care of our vets and our soldiers and end of life, people at end of life,
absolutely, yeah,
we felt falling apart as a society. So let's at least take care of those groups. Lauren, do you think psychedelic legislation through legalization is possible? What path would get passed, do you think?
It's such a chicken and egg problem. I think, major hospitals and doctors aren't able to test using psilocybin and other psychedelics because they're, class 1. And without that research and data, we can't prove that legalization could be safe and effective. So it really, is chicken and egg. What I really think needs to happen is that states need to allow medical research, and it should be across the board on a federal level that, psychedelics, including psilocybin and ketamine, can be tested. And then we have a much more realistic picture. Both the NIH and the Center for Disease Control were tracking some data. I'm fearful that data will not continue, but remain hopeful that science will always win the day. And I will say that I don't see states saying that this is safe to go off of that class 1 schedule until there is real data behind it, real patient data.
Yeah, I have a saying, in God we trust, everyone else bring data, right? It's data. You're right. And Lauren, speaking of the NIH, the NIH has allotted enough funding for painful headache conditions, but they have created BRAIN, BRAIN, which is supposed to focus on neurological conditions. How should patients be advocating for funding and research?
This was something I was very excited about. The NIH actually recognized, I don't remember exact years, but recently in the past couple of years, that all of these neurological pain disorders need to be studied and focused on, including so many debilitating headache conditions that Joe and I both advocate with. So they created BRAIN, and it was supposed to bring together some of the brightest minds in neurological disorders and neurologists, scientists, researchers. From what I understand, a lot of it has stalled. It does need to be funded. So in every state, people should be talking to their Congress people, their representatives, and saying, please continue to fund this initiative. I think headaches are one of the biggest disruptors of our economy. People stay home from work. They can't function in their home, in their daily lives because of neurological conditions. And, they are living with pain on an everyday basis. That's a very high level of pain. I mean, cluster headaches is extreme. I can't even open eyes. But, on this BRAIN initiative with the NIH, it was very hopeful.
Yeah, and we have a new administration. Any thoughts on where you think the new administration is going to go? Joe, you had your hand up. Yes.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the new administration, and then we'll move on to that. Yeah. So RFK Jr. has mentioned in the past that psychedelics, should be looked at and should be brought out of the shadows, because it is there is a lot of science. There were decades of science for psychedelics as a treatment for chronic pain, going back to the Korean War, where veterans were coming back from the Korean War, amputees, and they were using mirror box therapy in combination with LSD, and they were having tremendous success in treating phantom limb pain. There's also other chronic pain conditions that have been researched with psychedelics that show promise. There is some work being done by a doctor named Joel Castellanos that I'm aware of in California, as well as some other places around the world. So it's slow. More money needs to be put into research, like Lauren was saying before. Most of the studies are being funded right now by charitable organizations, by psychedelic donors. And that needs to change. The potential for psychedelics as a medicine to treat many conditions is there, and we're really doing ourselves a disservice by allowing the stigma to continue and not really, not taking a deep dive into it.
Yep. So we'll go to break, and when we come back, we'll ask Lauren about educating hospitals and emergency rooms and local physicians and so on. So let's go to break, and we'll be back in a minute.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to talkradio.nyc. I'm your host, Gaetano Lardiri. So, Lauren, I want to ask you, you believe hospitals, especially emergency rooms in the tri-state area and New Jersey, where you live, are not well educated on cluster headache syndrome? Do you think it would be helpful for more local doctors to meet and discuss this issue with patients?
Yes, it's actually something I discuss with my neurologist who happens to be in New York City. We discuss ways that either his neurological group in one of the main hospitals in New York City or the local hospitals can educate. So I actually have a sheet that I've created, and Clusters has some information that they can give out. And whenever I meet a nurse or a doctor in an emergency room who doesn't know what a cluster is, I go right into the education process. Like I said, patient advocacy is so important in these kinds of conditions, but really, I also think it would be beneficial for these universities who are studying these conditions to put out information to local hospitals and doctors' offices.
That's excellent. And Joe, again, tell us where can we find out more information about Cluster Busters, and talk to us about your board member as well. Talk to us about the culture, because I find the culture very fascinating. Just unmute yourself, Joe.
So so as far as information goes about cluster headache and cluster busters, you can clusterbusters.org. It's the website's there. It has links to a lot of the science that's been done. As far as the culture with Cluster Busters, my first Cluster Busters conference was in 2017, and that was when I was desperate and suicidal. I walked into a room full of patients and doctors speaking openly about psychedelics and other treatments, not just psychedelics, but other treatments for cluster headache.
It's not tripping.
No, not at all. No, not at all. It's people from all walks of life. Like I said, I've met judges, I've met politicians, I've met plenty of people from all walks of life that have cluster headache and that have come to conferences. The disease is very isolating. It's a lot of people that have this disease, besides the suicidal ideation, they end up losing their job, losing relationships. When you lose your job, you lose your health care, and they're really in a desperate place. And when you try to describe to a person of what it's like to live with this disease, how bad the pain is, it's really difficult for other people to understand. And when you're, for me, when I first walked into that room and I started talking to people, and it was life-changing for me, because it's kind of like you found a community. I mean, for me, it was an emotional release to be in a room full of people that totally understood what it was like living with this disease and how horrible it was and how it could destroy you and your family's life. So as far as the people there, it's not a bunch of hippies looking to trip. it's doctors from Yale and Harvard and these other places where they're doing research. It's moms and dads, grandparents, young adults, people from all walks of life, sharing their stories and getting support and learning from other cluster headache patients, because it's very difficult to treat this disease. And when you're in a room full of people that have been down that road before, it's priceless.
Yeah, and I've seen the culture amongst the Cluster Buster people, absolutely 100%. Lori, do you want to the culture as well?
I will say I'm so thankful for the community. I have yet to be able to actually attend a conference in person.
We're getting you there.
I know. It's always the start of school for me. But I hope to make it actually this fall in Dallas. But I will say, during the pandemic, they actually had everything on Zoom. And that was when I was first beginning to learn about this. And so I got to go to the conference for a little bit on Zoom, and it was mind blowing. And one of the nicest things was that they had patients each time speak about the condition. And then other than Joe and a few people that I had met, I didn't know anyone else living with this. And my husband actually sat through the entirety of the conference for the couple days with me. And they do something not only for the patients, but for the caretakers in the home. It's just such a wonderful community. It's hard to understand pain. And so that was life-changing. But I will also say, in terms of understanding psychedelics, there's been some amazing videos and documentaries out right now on like Netflix. One of the advocates in our group is a guy named Neil Ustain, who did a wonderful and beautiful documentary, How to Change Your Mind, with Michael Pollan's book. And there's another one, Fabulous Fungi, that really
fantastic fungi.
Excuse me, fantastic fungi. They both discuss, psychedelics and the natural nature of them. So I think not only is the culture of cluster busters really just special and unique, but it's also understanding that citizen science is vital to it, that this idea of psychedelics isn't scary or harmful. It's done with very big open arms and with love and community. So the whole process of caring for yourself becomes, I just think, very holistic.
Yeah, it's become very mainstream. I'm watching now every Sunday night at 11:30 on Adult Swim, Common Side Effects.
I think that's the funniest. I keep meaning to see it.
Great.
Can I plug a book too?
Yeah. Yes, of course, Joanna Kemp.
Yeah.
Perfect
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You go ahead. You're gonna okay.
Ahead.
There was a book written recently by a professor at Rutgers, Joanna Kempner. She's a professor of sociology, and she followed our organization for more than a decade, and she did a deep dive into the into the inequities of people that are living with cluster headache and how the medical community kind of left this out to dry. It's called Psychedelic Outlaws. It's got a pretty good title, but it tells the story of our organization and the struggles that people with cluster headache have, and with the current medical system, because the system doesn't serve us as it is now.
And where can people find that book?
Amazon. Psychedelic Outlaws by Joanna Kempner on Amazon.
And she has come and testified on our cluster buster behalf.
Correct.
She's, attending hearings in New Jersey for the bill. And it's really nice to have that support.
There was one other thing I wanted to mention too. The dosing amount for people with cluster headache, we don't need a really heavy dose of psychedelics. It's a light dose. It's not, considered a microdose, more like a mini dose. And a lot of people actually take the mushroom capsules before they go to bed and sleep through the whole experience.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, This is fantastic. You guys are amazing, and we look forward to telling more of the world about cluster busters. In the meantime, I'd like to bring on our sponsor, Jack Thomas, to say some departing words.
Joe, Lauren, thank you so much. The authenticity and the stories that I've listened last time and this time, it makes me think of how our generation, when we were younger, growing up, and how communities advocated the word patient advocacy, to hear that. Our intent at the Happy Spot is to bring alternative wellness through the New York City podcast. So numbers in perspective, there are 3.6 million people that have been listening to the podcast for 14 years. We have now been accepted by the Octopus Movement. I'm a founding member, and it's about being neurodivergent. So what happens is our neurodivergent movement is in connection with the mind, the neuroscience, and we're putting think tanks together around the world. So to have you to be part of this, I'm grateful. I'm just going to read a couple of notes just about a little bit about myself, to give people an idea of who I am and what we're representing. And so the Happy Spot, this is where your physical reality, highest potential, and soul's purpose are one. The future of work is happy. It's now. I help executives change their behavior to help the employees. It's a vision, global behavior change, one executive at a time. Let's remember, we have millennials in general and Gen Z. They're redefining what work should be. They watched older generations grind themselves down, seeing what happened, impacted mental health, relationships, physical health. Now they're saying enough, right? Look at this guy going around shooting people in New York City. We don't advocate it. We're just recognizing it. They're holding the line when it comes to things, work-life balance, flex schedules, fair pay. Look at what Jamie Dimon's going through in New York. Everyone's so frustrated. Here at the Happy Spot, our intent is to create a safe space to have real live conversations. And I'm just grateful for the two of you and say thank you. And I look forward to hearing more in the marketplace. Gaetano, you are a blessing. The people around the world and how they honor and respect you and watching the engagement. It's like sitting at the coffee table as a kid and I'm eating cookies out of the blue tin, you know, the butter cookies. Everyone knows that. Everyone, thank you. Have a great evening. I'll turn the floor back over to you as we'll be closing out the evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.